Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by April Brown, who is running in Ward 9 for the Providence City Council. The ward itself contains the neighborhoods of Elmwood and South Elmwood, and the incumbent for this ward, Councilwoman Carmen Castillo, is term limited, which opens up the seat for 2022. Ms. Brown, how are you today?
I'm fine, Raymond. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and it's great to have you on the show. My first question, it's a general one I like to ask to candidates seeking office. Why do you want to be Ward 9's next city councilor?
I am running to be Ward 9 City Councilor because I think that it's time for people to have as their leader someone who really gives a damn about the people in the community. I think that what has been challenging with folks this particular election season is that people feel abandoned. They feel like they're not being listened to.
Before we dive into specific policies you plan to focus on if elected, a big part of running in the council races is hearing what's on the residents' minds and what they want you to address if elected. What are you hearing from residents so far, whether it's when knocking on doors or even at the recent kickoff event you held?
One of the things that I think has been really interesting are some of the things that I talk about, having streets clean, but also what folks have been telling me is they want to have this idea of having community meetings. Because one of the challenges that I think for Ward 9 is that neighbors don't know who neighbors are. And that didn't used to be the case. And so as I think about what I want to do is I want to bring that back. I want to bring back the idea of the council not being a gatekeeper, but being this particular body of government that serves the people and letting the people know what's going on in that particular body.
Focusing on one part of that answer for a moment, you had mentioned clean streets. That fits under what a big issue that's focused on in this election cycle is, which is quality of life. It's definitely a top concern for residents, and it encompasses a lot, whether it's fixing the cracked sidewalks and roads or even making sure they're clean, to getting snow plowed quickly, to even just having a park that isn't littered with trash. What are some of the top aspects of quality of life that you plan to focus on as a city councilor?
Well, I want to talk about how we even get to this idea of quality of life. So quality of life was actually a concept that came into being through the Racial Environmental Justice Committee, right? When they put together the Climate Justice Plan, which is an organization that I'm currently the interim director of, and I was also on the committee. And it was a 5-year study of asking Providence residents, what is it that they thought would make their life better, right? And the idea was a concept of one video, right? So this idea was something that had been happening in the city for 5 years. And a lot of people have taken that work that this committee did and made it a part of their platform. And which is good because that means that people are paying attention to the plan. But I want to be really clear that when we talk about quality of life, we're talking about a specificity to the climate justice plan. That's one thing. The second piece is when I think about what my community wants in terms of quality of life, it is what you mentioned, right? They want roads that their cars don't get destabilized because of potholes, right? They also want the streets to be clean. Businesses throughout the state pay so that neighborhoods can have streets clean, and somehow, some way that doesn't make it to Ward 9. And that's problematic. And I think that there has to be a voice in Ward 9 that talks about those simple things. We have city parks that need to be cleaned. We have schools that need to have buildings updated. So when I talk about quality of life, I'm talking about all the things that you'll see in my priorities, because all of those things are quality of life things. I also think that pay equity is something that needs to be addressed when we talk about the city. In my ward, people can't get a job and just walk to it, right? They have to have a car or a good bus pass so they can get to a job, so that they can get paid a living wage.
While we're still on quality of life and focusing on some of the things like even having a mattress picked up from the sidewalk, there are a couple of ways city councilors have gone about addressing this, whether it's trying to get more funding to, fund basic city services to solve these issues, or maybe even host a mattress drive, or just, even having a volunteer crew and going to help clean up the streets themselves. How would you go about taking on these, I guess, issues that are affecting our quality of life?
I think that those are things that I would be more than happy to do. But I think also times when we talk about city services, it's about our neighbors knowing how to access city services, right? Because there are services that the city does provide around removal of trash, and people in the community don't know how to access them, which I think is the reason why community meetings are important. And also that you have an accessible city councilor so that people know that if they have those kinds of questions, they can call the city councilor, and the city councilor can help direct them to how to access those city services.
That's definitely a big part, especially picking up the phone as a city councilor. That's a very crucial. You had touched upon environmental justice a bit in one of your answers, and correct me if I'm wrong, were you on the state committee that was focusing on environmental justice?
I'm not on the state committee. I am on the city committee.
The city one.
Yeah, REJC, Racial Environmental Justice Committee. But I do work with people who are regulating that particular committee, and I have a voice in that space. But when I talk about environmental justice, women, I'm not talking about, the air, the trees. I'm really talking about how, when we talk about the environmental laws that have been put in place and how those environmental laws have affected certain communities, right? And the people who are affected by some of those things, particularly in my community, I think about the port, right? When we know that there are so many toxic materials at the port, right? And those toxic materials are very, very close to 3 hospitals, several schools, and it's troublesome about how we don't necessarily regulate those things. So that would be my day job. But it's really important to think about the lead that people have in their pipes, and how I think that there has to be a municipal responsibility. We can't expect taxpayers to eradicate lead pipes that have been a part of the infrastructure for over 100 years, right? So those are the things that I'm talking about. I'm thinking about when I think about quality of life and environmental justice, because for me, they go hand in hand. It is having clean water in our schools so that when students go to what we call here in Rhode Island, the bubblers, and other places, the water fountains, that they have clean water to drink, right? That they have a bathroom that's safe, that we don't think that some pipe is going to burst and then sewerage will be backed up in their school building, right? It can be cool in the summer and warm in the winter, right? These are very simplistic things that municipalities have the capacity to do so that residents and their children can be safe and get a good education.
And sometimes alongside those priorities under the topic of environmental justice, I've heard a lot of calls recently for a city level Green New Deal. To my understanding, it would be similar to what Boston did implemented starting in 2021. Would you support a city level Green New Deal?
Absolutely. Because a Green New Deal would mean the things that are important to me when we start talking about, you said job equity, but for me, it's not necessarily job equity. It's really about pay equity, people getting a livable wage so that they can live in tax pay in the city. I think it's a good idea.
My last follow up on the quality of life topic before we move on. Roger Williams Park is in the ward, and it's a hidden gem. It's a really beautiful park, and I've asked a few of the other city council candidates about this. Are there any plans or investments you would try to advocate for as a city councilor that could further utilize the park to its fullest potential?
So let me tell you, the Roger Williams Park was a place where my brothers and I played as little kids. That was like our adventure space. And I think it's not hidden. People who live in the community really do go to the park. But again, the Roger Williams Park is not any different than any place in Ward 9. The lack of investment that has happened in this ward is really sad. And it's also systematic in my mind. The ward used to be a very vibrant ward. There were businesses and things like Chris Cadillac used to be over there. There was a Jaguar dealership. And, you know, there were factories on this side of town. And what has been the challenge is that year after year after year, as businesses leave, there's not really anything to come back and really bring in that tax structure on the side of town. So, and the park is no different than that. I know that for me, when I think about the park, what we've done is we haven't really been able to look at it structurally in terms of how do we bring more people into the park. There's been a lot of what I would say really good decisions around making it accessible with bikes, and they've brought events there so that people will come. But I think it also needs to be a broader thing. There's an entrance on one side that's on the Cranston side, and then it comes into Providence that should be open. It hasn't been opened in all the years that we've lived here. And we've lived on this side of town for maybe 48 years. So those things, simple things, so that people can access the park. I also think that the zoo is, it has been doing the work that it needs to do so that it brings people in there. And I think it's more about that, bringing more people into the park to enjoy it.
Another topic heading into this election year that could also be relevant while sort of talking about quality of life and connecting it to this issue. The city has a housing crisis, and as does the state too. And tackling the issue of creating affordable housing will take all hands on deck approach. And I've heard a multitude of policies, whether it's changing zoning laws or just simply building more housing or rent control. There's quite a bit out there in the dialogue about this issue. What kind of policies would you favor when it comes to taking on the housing crisis?
I think affordable housing is not a singular issue, right? Affordable housing is, again, a systematic issue that needs to be dealt with several different ways. Because when you talk about affordable housing, you're talking about, okay, people buying their first home or being able to afford rent, or people who are at a certain age and they need to keep their house updated so that they don't lose their home, right? So that's literally three different ways to talk about affordable housing. I really appreciate what's happening with Crossroads and how they're having people of low income access good housing. But I think you also have to look at it in different ways. So when you think about the senior population, particularly my ward, and how are seniors able to get monies so that they can keep their houses up to code, because a lot of the homes on my side of town in Ward 9 are old homes, right? And so they've got that knob and tube, and they have to have all this electrical things happen so that the house can be brought up to code, right? And that kind of investment is the kind of investment we need when you think about rents, right? Like, how is the Section 8, how is that working so that we're not sending people out of the city so that they can have affordable housing? How is that working so that we can keep people in the city? That was another approach to this idea of affordable housing that has a budget line so that people can live and they can continue to be taxpayers in the city. It's a stunning thing to me, because that's what we want. We want more taxpayers in the city, but we can't figure out how to make it so that people can actually afford to live in the city.
There was also a plan to rehabilitate the Superman building and make housing in there. The plan has gotten some criticism because of how affordable is it really to live in the housing that's planned for the building. What are your thoughts on the plans for that building?
I agree with the criticism. I think that it's not necessarily affordable housing that's going to happen there. And there's a question that I ask. I think it's also a plan that's being developed, right? It doesn't have the ink isn't dry on it. But I do think that when you look at the budget and you look at those things, you're just like, there's some more conversation that needs to happen.
Speaking of conversation, a part of the topic of housing I haven't asked a lot of council candidates about, and it's actually very important because there is a lot of NIMBYism in the city. For those watching, NIMBYism, it's basically not in my backyard. It's an acronym that's been created for that kind of mentality. And then also just trying to get that crowd on board, and then the landlords too, because they vote, own property in the city, and pay taxes too, and they're going to have their thoughts about all these policies. How would you go about trying to get them in the conversation? Would you try and convince them that these policies are beneficial, hear them out? What would be your approach?
I think you have to have conversation, right? You know, landlords want to make money. It's an investment to own property. But I also think that there has to be a way by which we think of the people first. You have to think of the people first. You cannot simply think of the idea that the business is the only way, is the only structure that you make money in a municipality, because it's not. Right? And if we're not careful, Providence doesn't have the parochial approach that we like to the city, right? It's going to look like something else. And so we have to pay attention to the homeowners who are homegrown. I think the not in my backyard, nobody wants it in their backyard, but at some point it has to be in your backyard.
Looking at another topic that's a big issue heading into this election, the city's finances slash pension system. It's sort of like a ticking time bomb is how I've described it. And there was a recent bond, $550 million that passed with voter approval and the General Assembly. If that actually goes into effect remains to be seen because of the state of the economy. But it's not going to be the only solution. There are going to have to be other policies in place and solutions brought up to help fix the pension crisis. I've heard ideas like going to a hybrid option with the state, or some have said move to 401ks for new hires. Also, another idea that's probably the most likely is just somehow getting more revenue. Are there any recommendations, whether it's those or just some that come to mind, that you would try to bring up as a city councilor to help solve the pension crisis?
Raymond, you can't ask me questions before I get elected, right? At some point, you have to let me get elected, right? And then I think, first off, the city finances are not necessarily in a bad space right now. We have the ARPA funding, and what we have to hope and pray is that the money is spent wisely, and the people, particularly in Ward 9, aren't left with the short end of the stick. It needs to be invested wisely. You have to think about city services. You also have to think about the taxpayers while you're making decisions around these monies, right? I think the pension system and the vote that was approved, I think we have to see where we are. There's the bond that has to be borrowed against, and there's still more conversation that has to happen. I think what was really good about this is that something was done. It wasn't like a kick in the can to say, oh, I'm not going to deal with it now. This administration, oh, I'm not going to deal with it now. This administration actually tried to deal with it. No. Do I love it? No. But at least they attempted to do something about it. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to think about in terms of the pension system. We have to think about, how do we want to continue on it? Is it all right to borrow against it? There's a lot of math that needs to happen.
Another section of your campaign platform that we talked about a bit at the start, but not more specific into, is the job and pay equity portion of your platform. More specifically, ensuring women are paid the same as men. You also stress the need for livable wages for workers. Would there be a specific ordinance that you would try to introduce? How would this get accomplished on the city level?
Again, Raymond, you have to stop acting as though that I have the job. I have to get the job first. So what I will say is, the idea of people getting paid is an emergency, right? You want to understand why people don't have a quality of life. It's because in my ward, people can't walk to work and they can't get paid at a job where it's one job. You want to know why parents aren't going to their teachers' meetings, or why people are so tired? It's because they have 3 and 4 jobs, right? That's not okay. And rents are going up and taxes are going up. It's something that we don't have a luxury to say, oh, we'll wait for the state to, we'll wait for the federal government to have. We have to see how we can address that now.
One part that the state would be responsible for is the minimum wage. Not it doesn't necessarily solve that specific issue, but it is a big part of the conversation. Currently, it's set to be $15 by 2025, and it's being argued by some that that's still not going to be enough. I believe the political co-op is calling for 19, and Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, who's running for governor, has called for, I believe, 35. He said at a recent candidate forum. Is there a certain dollar amount that you believe it should be raised to?
I actually agree with Dr. Munoz. 35 is enough, but $15 is not enough. $15 is still only enough so that someone would only have to have one part-time job and not two. Not enough. When you think about how much it costs to rent, how much it costs to own, it's not enough. And we can't expect for people to stay in the state or to work in the state if those are the kinds of wages we're going to pay.
These next few are shorter form questions I've asked every council candidate on the show so far. Do you have a certain committee you would like to be on if elected?
Again, you're asking me questions that I'm not there, but I also know that that's not my decision to make. That is what that's the council president's job, right? I'm interested in city services. Again, for me, one of the things that is very important about Ward 9 is we think about how do we get investment back into the ward.
That is true, but you would be able to tell the council president, hey, would you consider adding me to this committee? That's why I'm asking. It's something that takes part of your vision to ask the council president. Another question I've asked every council candidate. This one would actually be your based on your decision. Which of the mayoral candidates would you support in the September primary?
That's none of your business right now.
Well, one that is your first vote as a city councilor, or one of the first votes, is for the next council president because it's a guarantee that there will be a new one. Is there anybody in mind that you would support for council president?
Listen, here's what I would say. I would say that, again, we have to have an agenda. I think one of the challenges with city council is that as a body, it's been so fractured. There has to be an agenda that works towards this idea of consensus. I also think that, whatever my colleagues would decide, if we can figure out how to work together, one of the challenges with the council has been this power struggle, right? That's not going to serve the taxpayers. It's not of any ward. If we can figure out how we can get to consensus and how we can get to the focus being on the citizens of Providence and not the power challenges and egos of individuals, that makes a good council.
So it sounds like it's still undecided at this point.
We don't know who's there, Raymond. You asking questions when we don't know who has any jobs. Yes.
Well, there are some city councilors where I can confidently bet money that they'll be there in January 2023.
So you can look into a crystal ball and tell me who's going to be there. You don't know, just like I don't know.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we'll have to wait till January for that one. My final question, this one is away from politics, and I like to always ask this at the end to take a step away from the political issues. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
The Ocean State, baby. All that water, all that beaching. Come on now. Newport, Charleston, absolutely. And everything that goes in with it. The seafood. I think we have the best seafood in the region. I think the hospitality that happens when you're at the beach. That's it right there.
Absolutely. Couldn't have been said better. Ms. Brown, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on the show.
Thank you. I've enjoyed myself, Raymond. You have a good one.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.